My name is Kyra. I'm 29 years old, and for most of my life, people have mistaken my calmness for incompetence. I work as an administrative assistant at a mid-sized logistics company called Falcon Line. We handle shipping routes, warehouse inventories, and endless streams of paperwork, basically. The kind of place where everyone's value is measured by how quickly they can type, talk, and reply to emails. I wasn't fast. At least, not in the way they wanted. From the first week I joined, I could feel the judgment hovering around me like a low hum. My supervisor, Miss Dean, was one of those women who always walked 3 steps ahead of everyone else, heels clicking like a countdown. She called me methodical, but the way she said it made it sound like an insult. My coworkers, especially Mia from accounts, never missed a chance to remind me that I was the snail of the office. They'd make jokes about how I still used a paper notebook instead of just trusting digital files. I laughed it off at first, pretending I didn't care, but inside, I did. I took my time because I believed in getting things right. Every invoice, every client request, every delivery confirmation I checked twice, sometimes 3 times. When others finished early, I was still sitting there, highlighting, cross-referencing, making sure no numbers were wrong. I knew they rolled their eyes behind me, but I couldn't help it. Precision was the only thing I trusted. Falcon Line wasn't a bad place to work, but it was filled with people desperate to look busy. That's what success looked like there, motion. The louder you were, the more people thought you mattered. I wasn't loud, so I became invisible. Miss Dean often gave me tasks that no one else wanted. Sorting through outdated inventory logs, cleaning up shipping records, proofreading lengthy internal memos. Just to keep you busy, she'd say with a tight smile. Like she was doing me a favor. But I didn't mind. Those busy work tasks gave me access to files most people ignored. I learned how shipments were approved, how contracts were signed, how internal authorizations moved from one desk to another. Every piece of paper told a story, and I was quietly learning them all. Still, being underestimated started to eat away at me. There were meetings I wasn't invited to because they said I wouldn't keep up. Promotions passed me by. Even Mia, who'd started a month after me, became senior associate. She used to tap my desk and say, "Kyra, you gotta speed up. The world doesn't wait for slowpokes." I smiled and said nothing, though sometimes I wanted to ask her what good speed was if you had to redo your work every other day. It was around that time the company started buzzing with rumors about upcoming layoffs. No one knew which department would be hit, but everyone acted nervous except Miss Dean. She walked around like she was untouchable, whispering with the executives, laughing during meetings while the rest of us sat on edge. Then one Friday afternoon, while refiling paperwork in the storage room, I overheard something that made my stomach twist. Miss Dean was talking to the HR manager in the hallway. "I think we'll start with the admin pool," she said. "Some of them are just slow. Dead weight." I didn't have to guess who she meant. My heart sank. All the effort, the staying late, the extra work, none of it mattered. In their eyes, I was disposable. That evening, I sat at my desk long after everyone else had gone home. The glow from my monitor reflected off the glass wall, turning my reflection ghost-like. I looked tired. Small. But I also felt something I hadn't felt before: resolve. I didn't know exactly how or when, but I promised myself that one day they'd see me differently. Over the next week, I started noticing things. Tiny inconsistencies in expense reports, duplicated entries in the freight logs, contracts with signatures that looked oddly similar. I wasn't supposed to be looking, of course. My job was to sort, stamp, and move along. But curiosity has always been my quiet rebellion. One afternoon, while going through digital archives for the quarterly shipment reports, I found something unusual: a series of internal emails accidentally saved in the wrong folder. The subject lines didn't match any legitimate department work. They were labeled with vague titles like adjustment notice and route realignment. When I opened one, my screen filled with corporate jargon that made no sense until I saw the names attached. They belonged to senior executives. And the more I read, the more I realized these weren't just harmless mistakes. There were unauthorized payments, approval codes that didn't exist in our system, and references to phantom vendors. My hands shook as I scrolled. I didn't understand the full scope yet, but I knew one thing: this wasn't normal. My instinct told me to save the documents somewhere safe, but my logic told me to leave it alone. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something huge was sitting right in front of me, wrapped in bureaucracy and hidden behind the assumption that no one would ever notice, especially not the slow girl in admin. That night, as the office lights dimmed and the janitor's vacuum echoed through the hallways, I plugged in my flash drive and copied everything. Every email, every attachment, every signature. My heart raced the entire time. I didn't know what I was getting into, but I knew this: I couldn't unsee what I'd found. When I finally walked out into the cold evening air, I felt strangely calm. For once, my slowness had worked in my favor. It had made me careful enough to find something no one else had the patience to notice. I didn't know yet what I'd do with the information, but I knew this discovery was going to change everything. But little did they know, the slow girl had already set something in motion. It started with a file I wasn't supposed to see. The morning after I found those suspicious emails, I woke up before my alarm. My chest felt tight, not with fear exactly, but with an unsettling awareness that I was holding something dangerous. I couldn't just pretend nothing happened. The flash drive sat on my bedside table, its little metallic surface gleaming under the early sunlight. It looked innocent, but inside it was a quiet bomb. When I got to the office, everything seemed painfully normal. Miss Dean was already striding between desks, clicking her heels like a metronome of control. Mia was gossiping with the logistics coordinator, laughing about some meme I didn't understand. My desk was where I left it: neat, ordinary, forgettable. I almost convinced myself that what I'd done was just a silly overreaction, until Miss Dean called me into her office. "Kyra," she said with that tight-lipped smile she wore whenever she was about to criticize me under the guise of advice. "I need you to reorganize the old expense authorizations from last quarter. Some discrepancies came up during the audit preview." That word discrepancies made my stomach twist. I asked, "Should I pull the electronic copies too?" No, she said too quickly. "Just the physical ones. The digital records are being handled." Her tone was calm, but her eyes flicked toward her monitor like she was guarding something. That's when I knew for sure. She was involved. I went back to my desk with a polite smile and began sorting through the files she'd mentioned. Only, I wasn't sorting, I was cross-referencing. Every authorization she wanted gone, I compared to the data I'd copied. And each one confirmed the same thing: false payments to non-existent vendors. That afternoon, I quietly sent an email to the IT department, pretending to need help accessing archived folders. The technician, a quiet guy named Nathan, reset my access credentials and gave me temporary clearance to the old server mirror. I spent my lunch hour pulling copies of everything Miss Dean had tried to hide. By the time I returned home that night, I had over 200 documents stored safely on my drive. Days passed, and the atmosphere in the office grew heavier. The audit team announced an upcoming visit, an official one this time. Whispers spread fast. People began covering their tracks, deleting emails, and staying late to update records. But the irony was that no one even thought to look at me. Why would they? I was still the slow one, the harmless one. That invisibility was my shield. Then something unexpected happened. I received a group email from Miss Dean about a digital cleanup initiative. It instructed everyone to permanently delete redundant archives. The message had a list of folders, and among them were the exact directories containing the fraudulent files. My pulse spiked. She was erasing evidence, and if she succeeded, I'd lose everything I had to prove it. That evening, I stayed after hours, pretending to finish paperwork. When the lights dimmed and the building emptied, I logged in to confirm what I feared. One by one, the directories were disappearing. Someone from management was remotely wiping them. I couldn't stop it, but I didn't have to. I already had copies. That night, while sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of cold tea, I realized I needed to think strategically. I couldn't just walk into HR and accuse my boss of fraud. No one would believe me. To them, I was barely competent enough to format a report, let alone uncover a financial crime. I needed to let the truth reveal itself naturally. So I waited. I worked slower, quieter. When Miss Dean asked for updates, I gave vague but polite answers. When Mia pried about what was taking me so long, I smiled and said, "Just making sure everything's right." Inside, I was watching every move they made, every suspicious file deletion, every unexplained expense adjustment. The more they tried to hide, the deeper they buried themselves. But I started feeling the toll. Nights blurred into early mornings. I'd lie awake, staring at my ceiling, wondering what would happen if they found out what I'd done. I imagined Miss Dean's fury, the company's legal threats, the way everyone would look at me not as the quiet worker anymore, but as the traitor. I had to remind myself why I started this, because the truth mattered more than fear. One evening, I saw Miss Dean leaving late, carrying a thick envelope tucked under her arm. Something about her body language caught my attention, tense, hurried. I followed her at a distance, just enough to see her hand it off to a man waiting by a black sedan outside the building. They exchanged a few words before driving off. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just office-level dishonesty, it was bigger. The next morning, the HR director made an announcement that the upcoming audit had been postponed due to scheduling conflicts. I nearly laughed. Conflicts, right. I knew what that meant. They were buying time to cover their tracks, but they didn't realize time was already against them. At lunch, Mia leaned over my desk, whispering, "Hey, have you heard? They might start letting people go next month. Be ready, Kyra." I nodded, pretending to look worried. Inside, I felt something close to calm satisfaction. They thought they were protecting themselves, but they were digging their own graves, paper trail and all. That weekend, I sat in my living room surrounded by printed reports, color-coded by department, by date, by person involved. It was meticulous, exhausting, and strangely empowering. Every highlight, every annotation felt like a quiet act of rebellion. For once, my slowness wasn't a flaw, it was strategy. When I looked at the mountain of papers in front of me, I realized something profound. The people who mocked me for being slow didn't understand that speed doesn't win every race. Sometimes it's the one who takes their time who sees what others miss. The file I saved that day would later change every name in the company's directory. The insults didn't sting anymore, they protected me. For months, I let them think I was the same old Kyra, the quiet one who double-checked everything and always took forever to finish a task. What they didn't realize was that every second I spent taking my time was another moment I used to gather proof, to document, to calculate my next move. My slowness had become my camouflage, and in an office full of noise, invisibility was power. I remember the day HR launched what they called an efficiency review. The notice was sent to the entire department, and of course, my name was right at the top of the list. Miss Dean even smirked when she handed me the printed memo, as if she'd been waiting for this moment. "Just a formality," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I'm sure you'll do fine, Kyra. Maybe this will help you pick up the pace a little." I thanked her politely, pretending not to hear the laughter from Mia's desk. But inside, I was steady. I had nothing to hide and they had everything to lose. That week, I worked quietly through stacks of reports. HR wanted documentation of everything I'd done in the past 6 months. Deliverables, correspondence, project timelines. It was the kind of audit meant to intimidate people into quitting before being officially terminated. I knew the tactic well. But they forgot one thing about me. I keep everything. Every note, every timestamp, every instruction I'd ever received. By the end of that week, my binder was heavier than anyone's in the department. I'd labeled and indexed every document with obsessive precision. Each report showed not just my work but proof of my reliability. I even included side-by-side comparisons of others' reports when their errors had forced me to redo tasks. I didn't highlight them maliciously, just factually. Facts were my quiet revenge. When HR called me in, the panel looked surprised at the thickness of my file. One of the managers flipped through the pages and frowned. "You've logged every project down to the minute," he said. "Yes," I replied calmly. "I was told accuracy matters." He didn't have a response. Miss Dean, sitting beside him, kept her expression neutral, but I could see the flicker of annoyance in her eyes. She wasn't expecting me to come prepared. She wanted me to crumble under pressure. After the review, I walked out without saying a word. That was the first moment I truly realized how much strength there was in restraint. They underestimated me because I never raised my voice, never fought back openly. But I was fighting in the only way I knew, through paper trails and precision. Days later, I overheard Miss Dean complaining in her office. "She's too careful. You can't pin anything on someone who's that painfully thorough." I smiled to myself. That's right, I thought. Try to find a single error. I dare you. The irony was that my so-called weakness, the habit of moving slowly, was the very thing shielding me from their attacks. While others rushed and cut corners, I built walls of verified data around myself. Every log I kept, every duplicate record I saved, was another layer of protection. They called me slow, but I was methodical. And in a place run by arrogance, that was lethal. Still, I knew that being careful wasn't enough. If they couldn't get me fired through inefficiency, they'd find another way. Miss Dean was the kind of person who needed control, and my quiet resistance was a threat she couldn't see coming. I started noticing her subtle moves, reassigning projects without notice, giving me conflicting instructions, then pretending she hadn't. Once, she sent me an email late at night asking me to process a vendor approval before 8 a.m. The next day, she claimed she'd never sent it. Luckily for me, I had already archived the message. My slowness meant I saved everything before acting, and that habit became my safety net. I began to understand that Miss Dean wasn't just careless, she was scared. Scared that someone had noticed her mistakes, maybe even the fraud. And that fear made her reckless. I just had to wait for her to slip. Around this time, I started quietly consulting with a lawyer, a calm, middle-aged woman named Denise, who specialized in corporate misconduct. I didn't tell her everything at once, just enough to get advice. She told me something that stuck. People who move too fast make noise. People who move too slow make impact. Those words became my mantra. At work, the atmosphere was changing. Whispers about the audit grew louder, and people began distancing themselves from Miss Dean. She acted unfazed, but I could see the stress in her posture, the way she rubbed her temples during meetings and snapped at interns for small mistakes. The pressure was closing in. I kept doing what I did best, observing, documenting, and letting her underestimate me. Every report I turned in was perfect, every spreadsheet clean. Mia even stopped teasing me for being slow. She started asking me to double-check her work instead. The irony didn't escape me. Then one afternoon, an email from HR popped into my inbox. Performance review results, pending meeting. My heart pounded for a second before I read the rest. It wasn't a warning. It was an invitation to discuss commendable accuracy and procedural integrity. When I walked into that meeting, Miss Dean's face said it all. She'd expected me to fail, to falter under pressure, but instead, HR was praising me. They mentioned how my documentation had helped clarify discrepancies in older projects. I didn't say a word, just nodded politely while she forced a smile beside me. That night, I went home and opened my laptop. The folders I'd created, labeled and time-stamped, felt like a lifeline. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore, I was building something that would one day expose them all. As I stared at the glow of the monitor, I realized my so-called flaw had turned into my shield. My slowness wasn't a weakness. It was strategy, armor, precision, and the longer I kept it on, the safer I became. By the time they planned to fire me, my paperwork already had them cornered. It was a Tuesday morning when everything went silent in the hallway. The sound of high heels clicking across the polished tile, a sound we'd all grown used to, stopped abruptly when the front doors opened. A small team of people in formal suits entered, flashing badges none of us recognized. They didn't greet anyone. They didn't smile. They just asked to be directed to the accounting department. It took me less than a second to realize who they were. The auditors had arrived. I looked up from my desk, pretending to act surprised like everyone else. Mia gasped softly, clutching her coffee cup. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Do you think it's because of the missing funds rumor?" I shrugged, feigning innocence. Maybe they just want to make sure everything's balanced. But I knew better. I'd been waiting for this moment for weeks. Miss Dean emerged from her office, her usual confidence faltering just enough for me to notice. She plastered on her corporate smile, greeting the audit team like they were old friends. "Good morning, we weren't expecting you so early," she said, extending her hand. One of the auditors replied politely, "Surprise audits are the most effective ones." I saw the faint twitch in Miss Dean's jaw. She led them toward the conference room, and the door shut behind them with a heavy click. Within an hour, the office buzzed with tension. People were whispering, typing, frantically opening and closing folders as if that would somehow erase their involvement in anything questionable. I kept my head down, working slowly, carefully. No one paid attention to me as usual, and that gave me the perfect vantage point. Around mid-morning, one of the auditors approached my desk. "Kyra Bennett?" he asked, reading from his clipboard. "Yes," I replied calmly. "We'd like to see your department's documentation for the last fiscal year, specifically freight invoices, authorization logs, and shipment validations." "Of course," I said. "They're all filed and cross-referenced." He blinked, almost surprised. Most people weren't that ready. I stood up, went to the cabinet, and pulled out a neatly labeled set of binders. "These are organized by month and department code," I explained, my voice steady. "Each document has a digital copy, and I've noted discrepancies when I found them." He took the binders with a small nod. "Thank you, this is extremely organized." I watched him walk away toward the conference room. Through the glass walls, I could see Miss Dean trying to maintain her composure as the auditors flipped through files. Her posture was tight, her smile forced. At one point, I saw her glance toward me, just a flash of irritation mixed with something that almost looked like fear. By lunchtime, the energy in the office had shifted completely. No one was laughing or chatting anymore. Mia came over to my desk, whispering, "They're asking for everyone's expense approvals. Even the ones from last year." "Really?" I said, acting surprised. "That's a lot of paperwork." "Yeah," she muttered nervously. "And Dean's losing it in there. She told HR she might need to temporarily restrict access to the archives. Why would she say that if everything's fine?" Why indeed? I went back to my computer and began updating my personal logs. Every request, every communication I'd received from Miss Dean in the past 6 months, I resaved to an encrypted folder on my flash drive. It was tedious, but methodical work always calmed me. The office around me buzzed like a beehive on the verge of collapse, but I was centered, focused, patient. By the afternoon, the auditors began calling individual employees for clarification. When my turn came, I walked into the conference room and greeted them politely. They asked standard questions: how long I'd worked there, what my duties were, whether I'd noticed anything irregular. I answered truthfully but carefully, choosing my words like stepping stones across a river. Finally, one of them asked, "Miss Bennett, we noticed your department's records are the only ones without missing authorizations. Every transaction is verified twice. How do you manage that?" I smiled faintly. "I'm slow," I said simply. "I double-check everything." A few of them chuckled. But one of the senior auditors leaned forward, intrigued. "Slow or not, your records are immaculate. If everyone did their job like you, this company wouldn't need us." That comment hung in the air long after I left the room. When I returned to my desk, Dean was waiting by my chair. "What exactly did you tell them?" she demanded under her breath. Her tone was sharp, her words slicing through her polished facade. "Just the truth," I replied evenly. "That I keep thorough records." her lips pressed together. Don't get comfortable, Kyra. You're not above scrutiny. I know, I said, looking her directly in the eye. But I'm not under it either. She didn't reply. She just turned and walked back into her office, slamming the door. As the day wore on, whispers turned into panic. People were calling their managers, trying to clarify old approvals. Mia sat quietly at her desk, avoiding my eyes. I think she was beginning to piece together that the slow girl might have known something all along. By the time the auditors left for the day, the office was eerily quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. I could hear the faint tapping of Miss Dean's keyboard behind her closed door, probably trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed anymore. I gathered my things slowly, tucking my flash drive into my purse. Before leaving, I looked back at my desk, the same one where I'd been laughed at, ignored, and underestimated for months. It looked ordinary, but that little space had become my fortress, my quiet battleground. Outside, the sky was a dull gray, heavy with the promise of rain. I stood at the bus stop, clutching my bag, my mind replaying the day's events. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt powerful. The next few days would change everything. I could sense it like the silence before a storm. The foundation was cracking. And soon everyone would see what I'd seen all along. And that's when the real panic began. I should have known they wouldn't go down quietly. The audit shook everyone, but it didn't destroy them, not yet. I'd expected chaos, but I hadn't expected desperation. The following Monday, I walked into the office feeling almost weightless. I'd done my part, and the auditors had noticed my work. For the first time, I wasn't the invisible one. But that visibility came with a price. It started subtly. I noticed my computer running slower than usual, certain files missing or moved to different directories. At first, I thought it was the IT department doing maintenance after the audit. Then I saw the access logs. Someone had been in my folders, someone with administrator privileges. The realization hit me like a punch. They were planting something. Later that morning, Miss Dean called me into her office. Her smile looked painted on, her tone unusually warm. "Kyra, how are you holding up after the audit?" she asked, pouring herself coffee she didn't drink. "I'm fine," I replied cautiously. "Good. I just wanted to remind you that the company values loyalty and discretion. We're a team here, you know." It sounded like a threat wrapped in corporate language. She went on about how misunderstandings happen and how some people misinterpret data. I nodded, letting her talk. Inside, I knew she was trying to gauge what I knew and how much proof I still had. That afternoon, things escalated. HR sent me an urgent message. "Please report to conference room B immediately." When I entered, 3 people were already seated: the HR director, the compliance officer, and Miss Dean. The air felt heavy. "Kyra," the HR director began, "we've received reports of irregularities in your recent submissions." I blinked. "Irregularities?" "Yes." Miss Dean interjected smoothly. "It seems some invoices you processed last quarter don't match the official approval records. They're under your credentials." I stared at her, my mind spinning. She'd done it. She'd taken the very documents I'd uncovered and shifted the blame onto me. My own attention to detail was now being twisted against me. "I'd like to see those invoices," I said, keeping my voice calm. The compliance officer slid a folder toward me. I opened it and scanned the pages. My name was all over them: authorization stamps, digital signatures, system logs, all forged perfectly. It was the same fraud I'd been investigating, only now my ID was attached. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room blurred. I could hear my pulse in my ears. But then something clicked. I remembered the flash drive, the one I'd backed up weeks ago, containing every original timestamp. Those couldn't be forged. "These are fake," I said quietly. "And I can prove it." Miss Dean tilted her head, feigning concern. "Kyra, I understand this must be upsetting, but you should take responsibility before things escalate. Denial won't help you." Her words were laced with poison. But I smiled faintly. I'm not denying anything. I'm just asking that we review the server logs from the original files. If these were mine, they'll match perfectly with my version. The HR director looked uncertain. The compliance officer frowned. Do you have access to those records? I have backups, I replied. All time-stamped before the audit. Miss Dean's composure cracked for just a second. Her lips tightened, and she looked away. She hadn't expected me to have evidence. After a long silence, HR decided to suspend me, pending investigation. They called it a procedural measure. I called it strategy. Being suspended meant one thing: distance. And distance was exactly what I needed to act without anyone watching. When I got home that evening, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I just sat down at my kitchen table and plugged in the flash drive. Every file was there, exactly as I'd saved it. The timestamps were unaltered, the metadata intact. I printed copies and highlighted the sequence of events, the ones that proved Miss Dean's manipulation. Still, I knew I couldn't fight this battle alone. I called Denise, my lawyer. They've flipped it on me, I said, trying to sound steady. They planted fake authorizations under my name. Denise didn't sound surprised. That's the oldest trick in the book. They're trying to make you their scapegoat before the investigation turns up their mess. What should I do? Stay quiet for now, she said. Let them think they've won. Gather everything, but don't confront anyone directly. The more they move, the deeper they'll bury themselves. Her advice made sense. The next morning, I emailed HR politely, thanking them for their transparency and confirming that I'd cooperate fully. I attached a simple note. Please ensure all system access logs are preserved for the duration of the investigation. I trust the company values integrity. It was a quiet sentence, but it landed like a grenade. Within an hour, Miss Dean emailed me personally. Kyra, I think we should talk, she wrote. I ignored it. The next few days were surreal. Being suspended meant I had time, something I'd never had before. I used it wisely. I cross-checked everything, building a timeline that showed exactly when Miss Dean's credentials accessed my files. Each modification had a digital fingerprint. The more I traced, the clearer her involvement became. Meanwhile, my coworkers began texting me. Kyra, what's going on? Mia asked. I heard you got caught up in the audit stuff. Are you okay? I typed back. I'm fine. Just letting the truth catch up. I didn't tell her more. It wasn't her battle to fight. On the 5th day of my suspension, Denise called again. I have a contact in the state's corporate fraud division, she said. If your evidence checks out, this won't stay an internal issue. You'll be protected under whistleblower law. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Whistleblower. That word scared me. It meant going against the company completely. It meant losing the safety of anonymity, but it also meant justice. I'm ready, I said finally. That night, I copied everything again twice this time and stored one drive in a safety deposit box. Then I sat back, staring at the glowing folder names on my screen. Every file was a weapon. Every document a piece of armor. They thought they could frame me, silence me, erase me. But all they'd done was give me more time, more reason, more proof. But suspension was exactly what I needed to act without anyone watching. People think revenge is loud, it isn't. It doesn't start with shouting or confrontation. It starts with silence, with deliberate stillness, with the sound of a clock ticking in an empty room while you plan. That's how it began for me. My suspension felt like exile at first, but then I realized it was freedom disguised as punishment. I could finally act without eyes watching every move I made. I spent the first few days gathering every scrap of evidence I owned. My kitchen table was buried under stacks of printed reports, flash drives, and sticky notes. Every page told a story of negligence, greed, and deception. I wasn't just documenting anymore, I was building a case. Denise, my lawyer, guided me through every step. If we're going to expose them, she said, we do it right, quietly, No one must suspect what's coming until it's too late. So I followed her advice. I stayed off social media, didn't respond to office texts except with polite neutrality, and pretended to be a confused, harmless employee waiting for HR's decision. Meanwhile, I organized my evidence like an investigator preparing for trial. I made 3 categories: fraudulent transactions, every falsified invoice and manipulated signature; chain of command, email trails showing how Miss Dean and her circle approved them; system tampering, logs proving my credentials had been accessed without permission. Every folder was labeled, cross-referenced, and stored on encrypted drives. I even printed summaries and color-coded them in binders, one set for my lawyer, one for authorities, and one just for me. During those quiet nights, I realized something unexpected. I wasn't driven by rage anymore. I wasn't even after revenge. I wanted justice not for myself, but for every person who'd been silenced, mocked, or bullied under the weight of corporate arrogance. I wanted truth to win. Still, it was lonely work. There were moments when I'd sit in the dark, listening to the hum of my refrigerator, wondering if I was in over my head. What if the company's lawyers buried me in legal threats? What if Miss Dean found a way to discredit everything I'd collected? The fear was real, but so was the conviction that I couldn't turn back now. About a week into my suspension, Denise called with news. "I've spoken with an investigator from the Federal Corporate Fraud Division," she said. "He's interested. If your documentation holds up, they'll open a case." I felt a rush of adrenaline. "What do I have to do?" "File a confidential whistleblower report. Everything you send them stays anonymous at first. They'll cross-check your evidence before moving forward." That night, I filled out the report meticulously, attaching each folder one by one. My heart pounded as I hit submit. It was the quietest click I'd ever made, yet it carried the weight of everything I'd endured. Then came the waiting. Days crawled by. No email, no acknowledgement, nothing. I started doubting myself. Maybe the files weren't enough. Maybe they didn't believe me. Every morning I checked my inbox before I even made coffee. Nothing. Then, out of nowhere, a text from Mia appeared. "Did you hear? Dean got promoted. Acting VP now. Guess the audit didn't touch her after all." I stared at the screen, my pulse quickening. Promoted. She'd not only escaped unscathed, she'd climbed higher. It felt like the universe was mocking me. For a few seconds I actually considered deleting everything, just walking away. But then I remembered the faces in those audit rooms, the auditors flipping through my precise files, the way they'd called my documentation impeccable. I wasn't wrong. She was just faster at spinning her lies. And that's when something shifted inside me. I realized I wasn't defeated. I was close. Too close for her to risk letting me stay quiet. She'd taken the bait by framing me, and that meant she was scared. Fear made people sloppy. So I waited again, deliberately still, letting her feel safe at the top. I knew that every decision she made now, every signature, every approval would be under scrutiny once. The investigators acted, and when they did, the fall would be harder than she could imagine. To stay busy, I refined my files even more, creating timelines and summaries. I mapped out every transaction, every deleted folder, every overlapping signature style. I could see her patterns like brushstrokes on a canvas: careless, rushed, arrogant. For someone who prided herself on being efficient, her fraud was sloppily repetitive. A few nights later, Denise called again. "They received your report," she said, her voice low but calm. "It's under review. Be patient." "How long does that take?" I asked. "Long enough to make them comfortable again," she said. "That's when it hits hardest." Her words made me smile. It wasn't about speed. It never had been. My whole life. People had told me to move faster, to talk quicker, decide sooner, act now. But this was proof that slow was powerful. Slow was steady. Slow was unstoppable. I began to sleep better after that. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anxious when I opened my laptop. I'd done my part. The truth was in motion, even if I couldn't see it yet. On the 10th day, I received an email from a restricted address. The subject line was simple: "Follow up, confidential submission. My hands trembled as I opened it. The message was short but life-changing. We have reviewed your submission and confirmed the authenticity of your attached documentation. You will be contacted soon for further verification. Please do not alert your employer. I sat back, tears welling in my eyes. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. I was right. Every slow, careful move had led to this moment. I looked around my quiet apartment, the papers, the folders, the exhaustion, and I realized something profound. This was my battlefield. And silence had been my greatest weapon. I didn't need to shout or threaten. I didn't need to match their speed or arrogance. I just had to keep being slow, steady, deliberate. Because the higher they climb, the harder they fall. My phone rang at exactly 9:17 a.m., and I almost didn't answer. It was a Wednesday, 2 weeks into my suspension. The air in my apartment was heavy with the smell of cold coffee and printer ink. I'd been sitting at the kitchen table revisiting the same files for the 10th time, wondering when anything would happen. When my phone lit up with an unknown number, I hesitated. I'd gotten too many spam calls lately. But something in me said, "Pick it up." "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Miss Bennett?" A calm voice replied. "This is Andrew Keller with the Financial Integrity Bureau. I believe you filed a report with our department recently." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My throat went dry. "Yes," I finally said. "That's correct. Good. I wanted to let you know we've verified your documentation. It's thorough, remarkably so. We'd like to meet in person to discuss next steps. Are you available today?" I agreed before I even processed what that meant. The next few hours felt like a blur. I printed out key documents, packed my binders neatly, and caught the earliest bus into the city. My hands trembled the entire ride. We met in a quiet cafe downtown. Andrew was in his early 40s, calm and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who spoke less but noticed everything. He listened as I walked him through the files, occasionally taking notes, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "Miss Bennett, this is one of the cleanest internal documentation trails I've ever seen. You've built what we call an airtight case. With your permission, we'll open a full investigation immediately." I stared at him, stunned. "That means?" "It means," he said, "that your employer is about to have a very difficult week." For the first time since this nightmare began, I allowed myself to breathe. By the next morning, the Bureau had formally requested Falcon Line's financial records. Word spread quickly. Even though I wasn't there, the texts started flooding in. "Mia. Kyra. Something's going on. Auditors are back. HR's in panic mode." Another message followed from Nathan, the IT tech. "They're checking system access logs. Dean looks like she's about to pass out." I didn't reply to any of them. I just sat there, staring at my phone, feeling a quiet, surreal satisfaction. That afternoon, Andrew called again. "They've been notified," he said. "We're coordinating with the Federal Audit Division. You'll be listed as a primary witness. Don't contact anyone at the company. Let them unravel themselves." It felt strange being told to do nothing. But maybe that was the point. My job was to stay still while the truth did the running. The next few days were a storm I watched from a distance. Executives were questioned. Miss Dean's office was sealed temporarily while investigators combed through her files. Internal access was suspended for multiple managers. The company released a statement claiming it was a routine audit, but I knew better. The walls were closing in, and they didn't even know who'd built them. Then, on Friday, my phone buzzed with a call I never expected. Mia. I almost ignored it, but curiosity won. "Kyra," she said, her voice trembling. "They're saying Dean got caught hiding unauthorized payments. People are freaking out. HR told us not to talk to anyone outside, but what's going on?" I paused before replying. "Mia, remember when everyone used to joke about how slow I was?" She hesitated. "Yeah. I wasn't slow," I said quietly. "I was watching." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, softly, "You did this, didn't you?" I told the truth, I said, then hung up. Over the weekend, news outlets began sniffing around. I saw a short online post. Federal inquiry launched into Falcon Line Logistics amid alleged financial misconduct. No names, no details, but I knew it was only the beginning. On Monday, Andrew called again. The Bureau's findings are going public soon, he said. When that happens, you might be contacted for comment. You're under whistleblower protection now. Don't worry, you're safe. Safe. The word didn't feel real yet. I'd spent so long walking on eggshells that safety felt like a foreign concept. Still, I could feel the tension in my chest loosening. That evening, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the rain slide down the glass. The city lights flickered against the water, blurring everything into color and reflection. For the first time in months, I wasn't anxious about what tomorrow might bring. I wasn't scared of my inbox or my phone ringing. I wasn't afraid of Miss Dean. The next morning, my phone buzzed again, this time with a news alert. Falcon Line under federal investigation sources confirm possible internal fraud scheme. I opened the article, scrolling down until I saw the subheading. Anonymous employee documentation exposes long-term mismanagement. My breath caught. There it was, the first ripple of truth breaking the surface. Later that day, Andrew sent a brief message. Your evidence was the backbone of today's report. You did good, Miss Bennett. I stared at the words for a long time, unable to stop the small, proud smile spreading across my face. All those late nights, all the mockery, all the whispered jokes about how slow I was, it had led here. To justice. I leaned back in my chair, closing my eyes as relief washed over me. I wasn't the slow one anymore. I was the steady one. The quiet one who'd seen everything. And when the first article went live, chaos followed. By morning, the headlines screamed their names. I woke up to my phone vibrating nonstop. News outlets, social media alerts, even old coworkers I hadn't spoken to in years, all flooding in at once. I blinked at the bright screen, trying to process what I was seeing. There it was, right at the top of every business news site. Falcon Line executives implicated in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme. My heart thudded in my chest as I scrolled through the article. It listed several names, executive officers, accounting heads, and finally, Miss Dean. Under federal review for financial misconduct. Those words looked almost unreal. I read them again and again, as if my eyes needed to convince my brain it was real. I should have felt anger, maybe even bitterness. But what I felt instead was stillness. A quiet kind of justice. The article went on to describe how an anonymous whistleblower had submitted comprehensive documentation detailing years of falsified invoices and internal manipulations. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it to be. I knew who they were talking about. By mid-morning, I received another call from Andrew. His tone was brisk but satisfied. The Bureau officially seized Falcon Line's financial servers this morning. Executives are being questioned, and multiple accounts have been frozen. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I stared out the window, the city humming below me, life continuing as usual, while mine had just turned a corner I couldn't have imagined months ago. So, it's really happening, I whispered. It's happening, he confirmed. You did the right thing. I thanked him, though the words felt small compared to what I wanted to say. When the call ended, I just sat there, staring at nothing. All the exhaustion of the past weeks seemed to hit me at once. The tension I'd carried like armor melted into pure relief. Hours later, my phone buzzed again, Mia. Kyra, she said breathlessly when I answered. Dean deleted all her social media. HR sent out a company-wide notice about cooperating with investigators. Everyone's freaking out. They said all records are being pulled from the servers. Then they'll find what they need, I said calmly. You knew, she whispered. You knew this was coming, didn't you? I knew the truth always finds its way out, I replied. She didn't respond for a long time. When she did, her voice was softer. I'm sorry for how I treated you, for calling you slow. You were the only one actually paying attention. I smiled faintly. It's okay, Mia. We all see things when we're ready. By the end of that week, 3 senior executives had resigned. Miss Dean's office was sealed, and her personal assistant escorted out under HR supervision. Falcon Line released a carefully worded public statement about organizational restructuring and commitment to transparency. But no one believed it. Investors withdrew. Clients canceled contracts. The company's name, once printed proudly on glossy shipping trucks, became a cautionary tale in headlines. And me? I stayed silent, watching. 2 weeks later, I received an official email from HR. Your suspension has been lifted effective immediately. We apologize for any undue stress caused during the investigation. Please report Monday morning to discuss reinstatement. I stared at that email for a long time, almost laughing. After everything, they were asking me to come back as if it were just another Monday. But I went. Not for them, but for closure. When I walked into the office, people stared. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. The woman they'd once called slow had somehow outlasted everyone else. I didn't gloat, though a small part of me wanted to. I just walked quietly to my desk, where a new monitor and fresh stationery awaited. It felt symbolic, like shedding old skin. Miss Dean's nameplate was gone from her office door. The blinds were open for the first time in months, sunlight spilling across the empty space. I stood there for a moment, remembering all the times she'd walked out of that office with her cold smile, dismissing me like I was insignificant. Now, her absence was louder than any insult she'd ever thrown. Later that day, HR called me in. The new acting director, Mr. Caldwell, sat behind the desk. He was polite, composed, but there was respect in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Miss Bennett, he began, on behalf of the company, I want to personally thank you for your diligence. Your documentation helped clarify discrepancies that might otherwise have been lost. We're implementing a complete compliance overhaul because of it. I listened quietly, nodding. I didn't need thanks, but hearing it still felt good. We'd also like to offer you a position on the new compliance board, he continued. You've proven yourself to be meticulous and trustworthy, qualities we'll need if we're to rebuild. For a moment, I couldn't speak. After everything they'd done, every insult, every dismissal, they were now asking me to help rebuild the company they almost destroyed. I could have refused. I could have walked away and let it all burn. But something inside me said this was my chance to turn the ashes into something better. I'll do it, I said finally. When I left the office that day, the air felt lighter. Colleagues who had once ignored me now smiled as I passed. Some offered awkward apologies, others simply nodded in silent acknowledgement. It was strange being visible after so long. That night, I took a walk around the city. The autumn air was crisp, and the streetlights glowed against the fading evening sky. I thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the planning, the loneliness, and how all of it had led to this quiet victory. I hadn't screamed, I hadn't fought, and yet I'd won. The truth didn't need noise, it just needed patience. I looked up at the stars hidden behind the city's haze and smiled. The same woman they'd called slow was now the reason their empire crumbled. What I didn't expect was what came next, an offer I couldn't refuse. I was offered the job Miss Dean used to have. When those words left Miss Caldwell's mouth, I actually thought I'd misheard him. I sat across from him in the conference room, blinking in disbelief. Head of Administration and Compliance? I repeated slowly, as if saying it out loud would make it real. He nodded with a small smile. You've proven you understand this company's systems better than anyone. We need someone who values accuracy over shortcuts, someone who can rebuild trust from the inside out. For a moment, I couldn't find my voice. I thought about every time I'd been mocked for working too slowly, for being too quiet, for double-checking what others ignored. All those moments that had made me doubt myself now stood as proof of why I was the right person for this role. I accept, I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt. That night, when I got home, I just sat on my couch staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my mind. The irony wasn't lost on me 6 months ago. They'd nearly fired me for being inefficient. Now they were trusting me to help lead the company. The next morning, my return made the office buzz like electricity. The news spread faster than gossip ever had. People looked up from their desks as I walked in, whispering to one another. A few smiled awkwardly, some genuinely. Mia approached me first, looking nervous. "Kyra, I heard about your promotion," she said, shifting from foot to foot. "You deserve it." "Really? Thank you," I said gently. "I just want to make sure things change for the better." And I meant it. I wasn't there for revenge anymore. I was there to rebuild. My first week as department head was surreal. I sat behind the same desk Miss Dean had once ruled from, same office, same view, but a completely different energy. The blinds were open now, sunlight filling the room, instead of shadows. The team walked in without fear, without the tightness that used to hang in the air. I started by reorganizing everything: policies, authorization structures, data systems. No more shortcuts, no more missing files. Every approval now went through dual verification, every contract through compliance oversight. I didn't want anyone else to have the kind of power Miss Dean had abused. The workload was enormous, but it felt right. I stayed late most nights, not out of pressure but out of purpose. Sometimes, I'd pause and stare at the city lights outside my window, remembering those long nights at home when I'd been terrified of losing everything. Now, I was shaping the company's future instead. One afternoon, Mr. Caldwell stopped by. "You've transformed this place in weeks," he said. "Morale's up, the audits are passing cleanly, and clients are returning. You've done more in a month than your predecessor did in years." I smiled faintly. "Thank you, I just don't ever want this company to become what it was." He nodded approvingly and left, but his words echoed in my mind long after. The team started trusting me in ways they never had before. They asked for advice, shared ideas, even laughed again. The atmosphere was lighter, more human. Mia became my closest ally. She worked hard to regain my trust, and slowly, she did. She was no longer the girl who mocked me. She was the one who stayed late beside me, sorting through endless files to fix what had been broken. Sometimes, though, I'd catch myself staring at the door to my office, remembering the day Miss Dean had summoned me inside to humiliate me. Now I sat in her chair. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, but I didn't let it consume me either. A month into my new role, Falcon Line was officially declared compliant. The federal investigation concluded that the fraud had been contained to the former management team, now facing prosecution. It was over. The company had survived. And in some strange, poetic way, so had I. Then came the letter. It arrived one quiet Tuesday morning, slipped into an interoffice envelope. The name on the return label made my chest tighten. Miss Dean. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Her handwriting was sharp, hurried. "Congratulations, Kyra. You must be proud. Enjoy the spotlight while it lasts. People like you don't stay on top for long." No apology, no remorse. Just bitterness. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer without a word. That same afternoon, I called HR and told them to have her name removed from all company records. "She's part of the past," I said. "And that's where she'll stay." That evening, after everyone left, I sat alone in my office. The hum of the fluorescent lights filled the silence as I thought about everything that had led me here. It wasn't revenge, I felt it was closure. For years they'd called me slow, like it was an insult. But now I saw it differently. My slowness had been my strength. While everyone else rushed, I had taken my time. I had watched, listened, and waited until the truth was undeniable. I stood by the window, watching the traffic far below, feeling the weight of peace settle into my chest. The view was the same, but I wasn't. But the ghosts of the past weren't done haunting me yet. I saw her again in the most unexpected place. It had been nearly 3 months since I'd taken over as head of administration and compliance, and things at Falcon Line were finally steady again. The atmosphere was light, our audits were clean, and clients had started to trust us once more. For the first time in years, I felt like I belonged not as the quiet worker in the corner, but as someone whose voice mattered. When the email invitation arrived for the annual Corporate Compliance and Ethics Conference, I didn't think twice before accepting. It felt symbolic, a full-circle moment. The woman once accused of inefficiency was now representing her company at a national event on corporate integrity. I even smiled at the irony while packing my notes. The conference was held in a sleek hotel downtown. The air inside buzzed with energy, business leaders, auditors, legal experts, all exchanging pleasantries and stories about reform and transparency. I shook hands, shared insights, and sat through panels about rebuilding trust in damaged organizations. It all felt strangely personal. Then, during the second day, I saw her. Miss Dean. She was standing near the registration desk, talking animatedly with two men in suits. Her hair was shorter now, styled sharply, and her name badge read, Evelyn Dean, Senior Consultant, Horizon Compliance Partners. For a split second, I froze. My pulse kicked up, my stomach twisting with disbelief. How could she possibly have the audacity to show up here at a conference built around integrity after everything she'd done? She must have felt my gaze because she turned her head. Our eyes met across the room. Her expression didn't flicker. She just smirked, like she'd been expecting me. I told myself to stay calm. I had nothing to hide, nothing to fear. But when she began walking toward me, I felt the familiar chill creep up my spine. Well, she said smoothly when she reached me. Look who it is, the company's golden girl. Miss Dean, I said evenly, forcing a polite tone. Didn't expect to see you here. Oh please, it's Evelyn now. Miss Dean makes me sound like I'm still at Falcon Line. She smiled, but her eyes were sharp and venomous. I'm consulting these days. Companies pay quite well for people who can clean up messes. Imagine that. I met her gaze without flinching. I imagine they'd pay even more if they knew who caused a few of those messes. Her smile faltered for half a second before she recovered. You always did have a sharp tongue when you felt safe. Tell me, Kyra, how long do you think that safety will last? I felt the heat rising in my chest but refused to let her see it. Long enough to know that I earned my place honestly. She leaned in slightly, her perfume familiar and sickening. You think because a few headlines painted you as some quiet hero that makes you untouchable? Don't fool yourself. People like you. You're temporary. You're useful until someone faster comes along. I stepped back and smiled. Then I suppose they'll have to move very fast to catch up. Her eyes narrowed, but before she could respond, someone called her name from across the hall. She gave me one last cold look, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking like echoes from the past. The rest of the conference passed in a blur. I went through the motions, taking notes, shaking hands, smiling for photos, but my mind kept replaying that encounter. Her words clung to me like smoke. That night, back in my hotel room, I sat by the window watching the city lights pulse against the glass. I told myself she didn't matter anymore, that her bitterness was just the sound of a crumbling ego. And yet, I couldn't shake the unease. When I returned to the office, I buried myself in work, determined not to let her rattle me. But over the next few weeks, odd things began happening. An internal report I'd prepared went missing from the shared server. An email chain discussing new compliance policies mysteriously deleted itself. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch. Then, one afternoon, Mia came into my office holding her phone. Kyra, she said, her face pale. You need to see this. On her screen was an article from a small business blog. Whistleblower turned executive under scrutiny, Falcon Line's past still haunts. It wasn't from a major outlet, but it quoted anonymous sources claiming the company's leadership hadn't been fully transparent. My name wasn't mentioned directly, but the implication was there. Do you think Mia started? Yes, I said quietly. I think she did. It was her signature move, strike quietly, indirectly, poison the well before anyone realized where the leak came from. She wanted me unsettled. I spent the next few nights combing through our systems, making sure every file was secured, every authorization properly logged. It was exhausting, but I refused to give her the satisfaction of watching me stumble. Still, her words haunted me. People like you don't stay on top for long. Part of me wanted to believe she was wrong, that I'd finally left her behind. But another part of me knew people like her didn't just fade away, they circled back, waiting for a moment of weakness. One evening, as I locked my office, I found a small white envelope taped to the inside of my door. No name, no return address. Just my own written in careful block letters, to Kyra. Inside was a single piece of paper. Printed neatly across the center were 6 words: "You can't bury what isn't dead." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. I recognized her handwriting instantly. I folded the note, slipped it into my drawer beside her last letter, and took a slow breath. I wasn't the same woman she'd tried to destroy. She could send threats, spread rumors, or whisper lies, but this time, I was ready. But her warning lingered longer than I wanted to admit. History has a strange way of repeating itself. 2 months passed after the conference, and life at Falcon Line settled back into its rhythm. The rumors Miss Dean had planted in that small online article died down quickly. No one with real influence took them seriously. Still, I couldn't forget the note she'd left. "You can't bury what isn't dead." It echoed in the back of my mind like a whisper I couldn't shut off. I told myself she was just trying to scare me, that she was clinging to whatever fragments of control she thought she still had. But then, small cracks began to appear in places that had been solid for months. It started when one of our partner companies, Horizon Freight Solutions, submitted invoices that didn't line up with the shipments we'd tracked. At first, it seemed like a simple clerical error. But when I requested the original purchase orders, they came back with signatures that looked too familiar. The handwriting, the formatting, the phrasing, it was all reminiscent of the old falsified documents Miss Dean had approved. My stomach dropped. I called Mia into my office. "I need you to pull the last 6 months of transaction reports for Horizon Freight," I said. "Cross-reference every payment authorization with our new system." She frowned. "Do you think someone's making the same mistakes again?" "No," I said quietly. "I think someone's making the same choices." Over the next week, I combed through the records myself. Each file told a story, and they all led to one name: Evelyn Dean. Apparently, after leaving Falcon Line, she'd joined a consulting firm called Horizon Compliance Partners, the same group contracted to review operations for Horizon Freight Solutions. It didn't take long to see what she'd done. She was using the same methods, the same pattern of dummy vendors and altered authorizations. Only now, she was doing it from the outside, under the guise of consultancy. It was audacious, almost arrogant, and part of me had to admire her nerve. She'd escaped once and thought she could do it again, but not this time. I gathered everything: proof of overlapping IP addresses, email correspondence showing her digital signature, even cross-company records linking her consultancy to Horizon's false invoices. The trail was unmistakable. That night, I called Denise again. "She's doing it again," I said, my voice steady but tight. "Different company, same scheme, and this time she's dragging our name back into it." Denise sighed. "Send me what you have. If it's as clear as you say, we'll contact the Bureau directly. She's already on their radar from the Falcon Line case." By the next morning, the evidence was in motion. But this time, I didn't wait for things to spiral before acting. I alerted the board myself. When I walked into that meeting, I felt a wave of déjà vu. The long table, the skeptical faces, the hum of tension. Except this time, I wasn't the one defending myself. I laid out the documents one by one, explaining each connection. Horizon Freight's audit reports were handled by a third-party consultancy, Horizon Compliance Partners, I said, clicking through the presentation. "Here's where the irregularities begin. Notice the vendor codes, the duplicate entries, the signatures?" Mr. Caldwell leaned forward, his face pale. "Are you suggesting this consultant is falsifying records intentionally?" "I'm not suggesting," I said. "I'm proving." I clicked to the final slide, where her name appeared in bold at the bottom of an authorization form. Approved by Evelyn Dean. The room went silent. Someone finally whispered, "She's doing it again." I nodded. "And if we don't report it immediately, we'll be complicit." They didn't hesitate after that. Within hours, the board authorized an official report to the Federal Compliance Office. The same division that had investigated Falcon Line was reactivated this time, with more urgency. The irony wasn't lost on me. For days, the building was alive with the sound of investigators, again familiar faces, who now greeted me with respect instead of suspicion. Andrew was among them. "Looks like lightning struck twice," he said when he saw me. "I guess some people never learn," I replied. He smiled faintly. "And some people never stop paying attention." The investigation moved quickly. Within a week, authorities had traced the fraudulent accounts back to Evelyn's consulting firm. The evidence was undeniable. She'd recycled her old scheme and expanded it across multiple clients. When the news broke, it hit harder than the first time. This wasn't just a company scandal anymore, it was an industry-wide reckoning. Every client she'd ever touched came under review. Her name was splashed across headlines, her firm blacklisted overnight. I watched the reports from my office, feeling something close to disbelief. It was over, for good this time. Mia came in quietly and set a cup of coffee on my desk. "You did it again," she said softly. "You stopped her." I shook my head. "No," she stopped herself. "People like her always do." That evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, I opened the drawer where I'd kept her old letters, the one that said, "You can't bury what isn't dead." I stared at the words for a long moment before tearing it neatly in half. She was buried now, not by vengeance, but by truth. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the quiet hum of peace settle around me. It wasn't triumph, I felt it was relief. Not loud, not dramatic, just the deep calm of knowing justice had finally completed its circle. And this time I didn't just expose them, I ended them. When the storm finally passed, I barely recognized myself. The weeks following the second scandal felt like standing in the eye of something massive, quiet, but heavy with the weight of what had just happened. Falcon Line was no longer the same company. Neither was I. The chaos that had once surrounded us was replaced by an almost reverent calm. Everyone walked a little straighter, spoke a little softer. It was as if the air itself demanded respect for what we had survived. The headlines were everywhere again, but this time, they didn't sting. Consultant exposed for multi-company fraud scheme. Former Falcon Line executive arrested in nationwide investigation. My name wasn't printed, but people knew. In the business world, whispers traveled faster than light. They called me the silent reformer, the patient whistleblower, even the woman who took down corruption twice. It felt surreal. The Bureau's investigation closed with a statement praising Falcon Line's new ethical structure and internal leadership. I was invited to contribute to a government advisory panel on workplace accountability. Me, the woman once mocked for being too slow. Now people were asking me to teach them how to be careful, how to notice the things others missed. I'd attend interviews where journalists leaned forward and asked, "How did you do it?" I'd always give the same answer. I paid attention. Despite the attention, I didn't let it consume me. Fame had never been my goal, justice was. And once I had it, all I wanted was peace. At work, things transformed completely. Employees who used to avoid me now came to my office for guidance. They asked questions about process, about diligence, about patience. I didn't just lead anymore, I mentored. And every time I reminded them that it was okay to take their time, that accuracy mattered more than speed, I could see a bit of myself in their nods of understanding. One afternoon, Mia came by holding 2 coffees. "Thought you could use this," she said, smiling softly. We sat by the big window in my office, watching the city below. "Do you ever think about her?" she asked after a while. "Evelyn?" I said, using her first name now. It felt strange on my tongue, like saying goodbye to a ghost. "Sometimes. But not with anger anymore. She tried to ruin you twice," Mia said, shaking her head. "And you still don't hate her?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. Hate only gives her space in my mind. I'd rather fill that space with peace. Mia smiled faintly. "You've changed, Kyra." "I've just slowed down enough to notice what matters," I said. That weekend, I was invited to speak at a business ethics seminar. I stood behind the podium, lights dimmed, faces staring up at me expectantly. It felt strange at first, me, the woman who once avoided attention, now holding an audience in silence. I told them my story, not in detail but in spirit. I talked about how underestimation can become a weapon, how patience can unravel deception, and how sometimes the smallest acts, saving a file, double-checking a number, can change everything. When I finished, the room was silent for a heartbeat before applause broke out. It wasn't thunderous, but it was heartfelt. And that meant more than anything else. Afterward, a young woman approached me, maybe mid-20s, nervous but determined. "Miss Bennett," she said, "I'm the only woman in my department. They make fun of me for being too slow, too careful. But hearing you speak, it makes me think maybe that's not a bad thing." I smiled and gently touched her shoulder. "It's not a bad thing," I said. "It's your strength. They just don't see it yet." She nodded, tears glinting in her eyes before she walked away. I stood there for a while after she left, letting the moment sink in. That was when I realized my story wasn't just about revenge or justice, it was about empowerment. My patience had become a legacy. When I got home that night, I opened the small wooden box on my desk, the one where I'd kept all the old documents, the flash drive, even Evelyn's notes. I looked at them one last time. The printed reports, the highlighted evidence, the long nights of fear and frustration, they were all part of me now. But I didn't need them anymore. I burned the copies in a metal dish on my balcony, watching the edges curl and blacken under the flame. The smoke rose into the cold air and disappeared. I half expected to feel loss, but instead, I felt light. Mia called later that evening. "So, is it over?" she asked. "It's over," I said. "But I'm keeping one copy, just in case." She laughed softly. "Of course you are. That's the Kyra I know." I smiled, glancing at the lone flash drive on my desk, the last untouched record of everything that had happened. I placed it in my drawer, locked it, and exhaled deeply. The world outside was quiet, the city humming like a distant memory. For the first time in years, I wasn't bracing for anything. I was simply living, but I still keep one copy of those files just in case. They called me slow, but patience was my weapon. It's strange how time changes the meaning of words. What once felt like an insult now feels like a crown. People still use the word slow when they talk about me, but it sounds different now, like respect disguised as curiosity. They say things like, "Kyra never rushes," or "she's deliberate, careful." And they say it with admiration, not mockery. The world moves fast, too fast sometimes. Everyone wants shortcuts, instant results, immediate gratification. But I've seen what happens when people move without thinking. I've watched empires collapse because someone didn't take an extra 5 minutes to double-check their work. I've lived through it. And maybe that's why I've built my life around one simple truth. Speed fades, but precision lasts. In the months after Evelyn's final downfall, Falcon Line flourished. The company's reputation transformed completely. We became known for our transparency, our integrity, and yes, our meticulous paperwork. My department's processes were adopted company-wide, and soon, other corporations started reaching out, asking for training. I launched an internal program called The Steady Path. It focused on mindfulness in documentation, deliberate communication, and accountability. I taught employees how to slow down without falling behind, how to breathe before hitting send, how to look twice before signing once. It became one of the most successful initiatives in Falcon Line's history. One morning, Mr. Caldwell stopped by my office. "Kyra," he said, "we've been approached by a university. They want you to guest lecture on corporate integrity." I couldn't help but laugh softly. "Me? A lecturer? Who better?" he said. "You didn't just change this company, you changed how we think about patience." I agreed, though the idea felt surreal. The lecture hall was filled with students in crisp suits, notebooks open, eyes fixed on me. I told them my story not with drama, but with honesty. I explained how being underestimated gave me power, how silence can be strategy, and how the slowest workers often see what others overlook. When I finished, a student raised her hand. "Miss Bennett," she said, "if you could go back to those years when everyone doubted you, would you change how you acted? Would you try to be faster?" I smiled, shaking my head. No, being slow forced me to be careful. It saved me. It revealed the truth. If I'd been faster, I might have missed it all. The audience went quiet. That was the moment I realized something profound. My patience hadn't just changed my career, it had rewritten my entire sense of identity. That evening, as I walked home, the city felt softer somehow. I passed a cafe where office workers sat tapping on laptops, rushing through emails and coffee. I used to envy them once, their confidence, their quick wit, their decisiveness. Now, I pitied their hurry. I'd learned that control isn't in speed, it's in awareness. When I got home, I poured myself tea and opened my journal. I'd started writing again, a habit I'd lost during the chaos. I wrote about what patience had taught me, that sometimes silence is louder than anger, that time can be your greatest ally if you know how to wait, and that moving slowly doesn't mean standing still, it means moving with intention. I smiled at the words on the page, realizing that they weren't just lessons, they were my legacy. A few weeks later, Falcon Line hosted a gala to celebrate our industry recognition for outstanding ethical reform. I stood by the stage as Mr. Caldwell spoke, his voice proud and firm. "Every transformation starts with one person who refuses to rush," he said, glancing in my direction. "Someone who understands that truth needs time to surface. That person is Kyra Bennett." The applause that followed was humbling. I didn't feel triumphant, I felt grateful. Grateful for the slow mornings, the lonely nights, the endless reviewing of files that no one else cared about. Every second of that careful patience had led here to peace, respect, and redemption. After the ceremony, Mia hugged me tightly. "You've turned patience into power," she said. I laughed softly. "It was never power," I said. "It was survival. Power just came as a byproduct." But as I walked home under the quiet hum of the city lights, I thought more about what she said. Maybe patience was power, just the kind that doesn't show itself until it's too late to stop. That night, I sat by my window with a soft breeze drifting in. The skyline shimmered, reflections of light dancing across my tea. My thoughts wandered to Evelyn, not in anger, but in understanding. She had chased control, speed, and dominance her whole life. And in doing so, she'd burned everything she touched. I, on the other hand, had learned to pause to breathe between moments, and that made all the difference. I closed my journal and smiled. I didn't need revenge anymore. I didn't even need validation. I had something better. Peace born from patience. But every time I sign a document, I remember how it all began. I never imagined those words would define my story. When I first heard them whispered behind my back, they were meant to humiliate me. "Kyra's so slow," they said. "She'll never survive in corporate." And for a while, I believed them. I thought being cautious meant being weak, that being quiet meant being invisible. But now, sitting in my office, the one with sunlight spilling through the windows I refuse to keep closed, I understand the truth behind those words. I wasn't slow, I was steady. I was deliberate. I was unstoppable in ways none of them could see. It's been a year since Falcon Line became a symbol of reform. A year since Evelyn's empire collapsed for good. The company is thriving again, not because we worked faster, but because we learned to work smarter. Every process is documented. Every signature is verified. Every detail has meaning. The same meticulous habits they once mocked me for have become the foundation of how we operate. I've trained new hires personally, teaching them not to fear patience. I tell them that excellence isn't about how quickly you finish, it's about how well you understand what you're doing. I see the looks in their eyes when I speak, that mix of confusion and respect. They don't quite get it yet, but they will. Sometimes, I watch them from my office, moving through the open workspace, collaborating, double-checking, taking their time. and I smile. They don't realize it, but they're part of something I built from ashes. Every morning, I walk into this place and feel something different, something pure. The tension that once hung in the air is gone. The laughter that used to sound nervous is now genuine. People no longer rush to appear busy, they move with calm purpose. Falcon Line has become what I always wished it could be: honest, deliberate, human. Still, there are moments when I think back to the beginning. To that small desk where I sat with trembling hands, filing papers while people rolled their eyes. To the nights when I stayed late, the only light in a dark office, wondering if anyone would ever notice the work I did. Those memories feel distant now, but I keep them close. They remind me where I came from. Last week, during an internal awards ceremony, Mr. Caldwell handed me a plaque engraved with the words, "For transforming precision into power." I ran my fingers over the lettering, feeling the weight of everything those words represented. For the first time in my life, I felt seen not as the slow one, not as the background worker, but as someone who changed things by refusing to rush. After the ceremony, I stayed behind in the empty hall, just listening to the echo of my heels on the floor. I thought about everyone who had once doubted me. Mia, Miss Dean. The coworkers who whispered and realized I didn't resent them anymore. They'd taught me something even they didn't mean to, that endurance beats speed every time. That evening, I went home and opened my desk drawer. The flash drive was still there, the one I'd promised to keep, just in case. I picked it up, feeling its cool metal surface against my palm. It used to symbolize fear, my lifeline if everything fell apart. Now it felt like a relic of another life. I smiled and placed it inside a small wooden box with my award plaque. Sealing them together, not as reminders of what went wrong, but of how far I'd come. A few days later, I received an invitation to speak at an international business summit. The topic, the role of patience in leadership. I laughed softly when I read it. If someone had told me years ago that people would one day pay to hear me talk about patience, I would have thought it was a joke. At the summit, standing under the bright lights, I looked out at hundreds of faces, leaders, executives, students, and started with the same line that had haunted me for years. They called me slow, I said, pausing to let the words settle. But I learned something along the way. The world mistakes speed for strength. But strength isn't measured by how fast you move, it's measured by how long you can stand still when everyone else is running. The room was silent, the kind of silence that means people are listening deeply. I told them about Falcon Line, about precision, about trust. I spoke about how being underestimated can be a gift if you know how to use it, how being patient doesn't mean passive, it means prepared. And when I ended, the applause was soft at first, then thunderous. But even then, I just smiled quietly. Afterward, a young man approached me and said, "Miss Bennett, I used to think being slow meant I'd never succeed. But after hearing you speak, I think I just need to stop rushing to be seen." I nodded. "The world notices eventually," I told him. "The truth always does." When I returned home that night, I opened my laptop and looked at the screensaver, a photograph I'd taken of my office window. The morning light filtered through the blinds in soft stripes across my desk, illuminating a neat stack of papers waiting for my signature. That's my favorite moment of every day, the stillness before the work begins, the quiet rhythm of order and purpose. It's strange how something as simple as paperwork lines, dates, signatures became my salvation. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't loud, but it was steady, and it told the truth better than anyone ever could. Now, whenever I pick up my pen, I think about the journey that got me here, about the whispers that once hurt, and how they turned into lessons, about how every careful step I took, every delay, every pause led me not backward, but forward in disguise. I may have been slow, but I was never still, and in the end, that's what saved me. Because sometimes, the slowest steps leave the fastest paper trail.